Welcome back. Now, when one usually thinks of the Middle East, images of violence, strife, and bad human living conditions comes into mind. But what is the cause of all the conflict? Joining me in studio now is the renowned political economist and scholar Dr. Adam Hanieh, and he is here in South Africa on invitation from the Afro-Middle East Centre to give a speaking tour this week about his book called Lineages of Revolt, Issues of Contemporary Capitalism in the Middle East. Dr. Hanieh, good morning to you and thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you very much, Bidith. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. We're delighted to have you as well. But talk to us about, what was going in your mind when you sat down and penned this book?
Yeah, well, this book was written in 2012, through 2012. And of course, at this moment, there was the uprisings that began in Tunisia in December 2010 and then spread rapidly across the whole of the Middle East. Were really in full steam. And it was a moment of optimism. It was a moment of hope. It was a moment of, we all felt that we were going to see real substantial change in the region. Now, that hasn't happened. And this book was an attempt to understand what were the underlying causes, the underlying reasons, the underlying forces putting people on the streets and looking for change across the whole of the region. Yeah,
and I wanted to ask as to what themes does the book explore? What's in this book specifically?
I think there are two main themes. The first one is that the political change that was so obviously needed and is still needed in the region, the problem of dictatorship, the problem of authoritarian states, the lack of democracy, cannot be separated from the economic problems facing the region as well. I was really trying to argue that we can't say we just need to change that ruler in power, we just need to change that particular dictator. We also need to address the substantial economic inequality, the poverty, and the results of the kinds of economic policies that we've seen over the last 30 years in the Middle East. So that was the first thing. The political and the economic really need to be seen as one, as fused, and need both to be addressed.
Which is still a challenge now.
Of course, and that remains the main challenge in the region. The second main theme, and this is why I tried to take a regional perspective, was to try to point out that this is not a problem in one particular country. It wasn't just Tunisia, it wasn't just Egypt. The fact that these uprisings spread across the whole of the region, from the Atlantic to the Gulf, from Morocco to Bahrain, to Jordan, to Lebanon, all of these countries were affected and were suffering from the same kinds of issues. So to try to get that regional perspective was very important to me as well.
Yeah, and by the sounds of it, Dr. Hanieh, it looks like capitalism and neoliberalism doesn't really work in the Middle East.
Well, I would say it doesn't really work anywhere, to be frank. But what I was trying to do was to point out that the kinds of problems that we see in the Middle East have much deeper roots. And really, we need to come and look at the issues of socio-economic inequality and the results of the neoliberal policies that we've seen since the 1980s. It was no accident that Tunisia and Egypt were the epicenter and the beginnings of the uprisings, because these were the states where the neoliberal agenda was most forcefully pushed by the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and Western advisors. They supported the authoritarian governments, and they supported them because they wanted to see these kinds of economic policies in the region.
All right. Now, you're visiting us here, of course, on an invitation from the Afro-Middle East Centre. Talk to us about your tour. Where are you going to be, and how can people get to attend your talks? Well,
the tour is, I'm going to be speaking both here in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. It's my first time in South Africa, and it's a real...
how are you finding it?
I've only arrived yesterday, but
it seems to be
like a fascinating and incredible country. And of course, the South African struggle against apartheid is something that really inspires millions of people around the world, particularly in the Middle East. So that's, to me, very exciting to be here and to learn from the kinds of struggles that you have seen in this country. It's a great honor. So I'm going to be speaking tonight at 6:30 at Constitutional Hill. on the issue of Palestine. And then I have a number of other talks at the universities here and then also in Cape Town at the end of the week.
All right, and I'm so interested in the issue that you were detained and banned for 10 years in Israel. How has that affected your research? Because I know you actually went there for academic purposes.
I went there in September last year,
yes.
In order to give some lectures at a PhD program in a Palestinian university in the West Bank. And I was prevented from entering they didn't actually give me a specific reason except for the public security.
But many people were not surprised. They were saying that you've always been very vocal and called for Israel to be boycotted and isolated. So they were not surprised by this move by the Israeli government.
Yes, and it's important to point out that there are many people who this has happened to. Israel really is attempting to prevent independent voices being heard around the issue of apartheid in Israel. And this is something that I think in many ways the kinds of preventing people from entering, banning people from the country is a signal that the movement to boycott Israel is actually having an effect. And that is something that I think we can all be proud of.
All right. No, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much and all the best for tonight.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. That was author and scholar and political economist Dr. Adam Hanieh talking to us about his new, not really new, it was published in 2012.
And reissued here by
yes. There you have it. Lineages of Revolt, Issues of Contemporary Capitalism in the Middle East. He is in South Africa on a speak tour this week. As he said, he's in Johannesburg tonight at 6:30. Well, it's time for your sport up.